Hello and welcome to the third video here at Hockey Statistics YouTube channel. Today I want to talk about rink bias and what effect it has on current statistics, current metrics. So we'll just get started. What is rink bias? Rink bias is systemic tracking errors. So for instance, at some locations, some arenas, you got shots being tracked too close to the net, and in other arenas you got shots being tracked too far away from the net. That's what we call rink bias. So this is important because the expected goals value relies primarily on shot location. So if shots are consistently tracked too far away from the net, it will mean that the expected goals value will be too low. And the opposite is of course the case. If the shots are tracked too close to the net, then the expected goals value will be artificially high. So why does this happen? Why does this rink bias exist? Well, it all has to do with how the NHL tracks its data. So all tracking is done on location, and it's done by the home team. So this means that there is a few guys, maybe even the same guy, that tracks all shots in, for instance, Anaheim. So all Anaheim's home team shots are tracked by the same guy, or just a few guys. So if this one guy tracks things differently than a guy from, say, Tampa Bay, then those differences will accumulate over time. So they will become quite large actually. So this is of course problematic, and it happens because of how NHL tracks things. What they should do is they should have their own tracking teams so that they could track things remotely. They don't need to be on location, I don't think so. They could do it via video. This way the NHL could educate their trackers to make sure that the differences are slight. So even though they are tracked by humans, the precision should hopefully be better. But perhaps more importantly, if the tracking is done by the NHL themselves, then they could randomize the trackers so it's not the same tracker that tracks all Anaheim games. This way, even if there are differences in how the trackers track things, those differences would even out with a large enough sample size. Now, obviously this is not the case, so we need to adjust for rink bias. I won't do that in this video. I'll just focus on discussing what rink bias is and how it affects things. Then in the next video I will do the actual adjustment, show how I adjust for rink bias. Okay, so the next question is, how does this affect current statistics, current metrics that we're using? Well, we could just go to evolvinghockey.com and just look at some things. So if you're looking at, let's say, expected goals for percentage, then the effect of rink bias is actually quite small, because the expected goals for is more or less evened out by the expected goals against. So the effect of rink bias will be fairly limited. Now there are still some effect of rink bias, especially when you're getting far away from 50%. So if you have a An arena effect that is positive, that's when the shots are tracked too close to the net. Then the expected goals for percentage would be pushed away from 50%, meaning good players will seem better than they really are, and bad players will seem worse than they really are. Now, the opposite is the case when the arena effect is negative, then shots are tracked too far away from the goal, and the expected goals for percentage will be pulled towards 50%. So, good players, in terms of expected goals for percentage, will seem more average than they really are, and bad players will seem more average than they really are. So overall, you could use expected goals for percentage even without adjusting for rink bias, because the effect is fairly limited. Now, one important thing to know is that natural static and evolving hockey does not adjust for rink bias. So it's definitely something that's important to be aware of. So that was the expected goals for percentage. What's more interesting is looking at stats that uses only expected goals for or expected goals against. So we could look at goalie stats, goals saved above expected. That's simply expected goals against minus goals against. So in this case, the arena effect or the rink bias plays an enormous part, because if the arena effect is positive, this means that shots are tracked too close to the net and the expected goals against will be artificially high. This will mean that the goals saved above expected is also too high. Now again, the opposite is the case with a negative arena effect, then the goals saved above expected will be too low. So just as an example of this, we could look at Andrei Vasilevsky. Because he's a good example. So in Tampa Bay, there's a negative arena effect, and this means that the goal saved above expected is underrated. So if you just took this number without any context, you would say that Vasi is well below average goaltender if you judge him by goals saved above expected. Now this doesn't fit with the eye test, and it doesn't fit with the GSAA, which is just save percentage above expected, above average, sorry. So there's something wrong here, and this is the clear effect of rink bias. Now you could also, just to show it even more, you could go to natural static and look at the stats of Henrik Lundqvist in the early seasons. So in Madison Square Garden, there was a very, very high arena effect in the early seasons. So this means that that GSAX is highly overrated in Madison Square Garden. So we're looking at natural static because here we can look at home stats alone. So I'll just pick New York Rangers. And here's the Lundqvist. He has 223 goals against, expected goals against, and 171 actual goals against. So this means that he has a GSAX of 52 at even strength at 5-on-5. So that's crazy good. And it's just at home. So we could even also look at the shot distance, 28 feet. So all shots are taken very, very close to the net. Just to show the arena effect, we'll just look at his away stats as well. So now we got Henrik Lundqvist at 150 expected goals and 150 actual goals. So his away stats are way, way worse than his home stats. And it's even more explicit when we look at the shot distance. So here the shot distance is 36 feet compared to the 28 at home. So I'm not saying Henrik Lundqvist is a bad goaltender by any means. He's still a great goalie. But his stats, if you look at goals saved above expected, is definitely overrated in his early seasons. And that's the effect of Rink Bias. So clearly Rink Bias is an important part when you're looking at goals saved above expected. You could also look at goals scored above expected. That's just the shooter counterpart to that. How many goals does a player score above the expected? So that would just be goals for minus expected goals for. So that would be equally affected by Rink Bias, just in the opposite direction. So at the Madison Square Garden, shooters would look worse than they really are, and goaltenders look better. So that's just it. Okay, so the final thing we could look at is we could just go to Evolving Hockey and look at their GAR models. We'll just discuss the GAR model now. So how does Rink Bias affect these? Generally speaking, the offensive components of GAR is unaffected by Rink Bias because those are based on actual goals and not expected goals. Now, regarding the defensive components, like even strength defense, those are heavily affected by Rink Bias because those are dependent on expected goals against. So the defensive components, even strength defense, shorthanded defense, are affected by Rink Bias. The offensive ones are not. So just to summarize, you could say that in an environment like Tampa Bay, goaltending would be underrated, but the defense would be overrated. And in an environment like New York Islanders, where the arena effect is positive, the opposite would be the case. So the defense, when you look at GAR components, would be underrated, but the goaltending would be overrated when you look at GSAX. So I think that's it for today, and we'll just do the actual adjustments in the next video. So goodbye.